It started with a spilled coffee and an apology that felt too sincere. Sofia Alvarez laughed it off, not realizing that moment would stain more than her sleeve. Ethan Mercer stood there, composed, charming, offering to buy her another cup as if fate had rehearsed the moment for him. Their conversations unfolded easily, words gliding like a melody she didn't know she missed. He spoke of dreams, of places he'd been, of wanting something real. Sofia believed him, not because of what he said, but how he looked at her, like she was a secret he'd been waiting to find. She didn't see the shadow behind his smile, the weight of a truth too heavy to confess. Every red flag shimmered like a rose petal under soft light, beautiful enough to ignore. Ethan's messages became a quiet rhythm in Sofia's day. Good mornings wrapped in affection, late-night thoughts that made her believe he was bearing his soul. Every word carried warmth, but something about their perfection began to feel rehearsed. When she mentioned meeting his friends, he smiled and said he preferred just the two of us, as if the world outside their bubble was a threat. Sofia brushed it off, telling herself that privacy meant depth. But sometimes when he spoke about his past, his eyes clouded, a flicker of something unspoken. She didn't press. She wanted to believe in the version of him that loved her, not the silence that followed whenever she tried to ask who he really was. They began sharing routines, meals, playlists, even silences that felt like belonging. When Ethan called from business trips, his voice was steady, affectionate, too consistent to doubt. But Lena noticed what Sofia didn't, that every photo he sent looked like it came from stock dreams, hotel rooms without personal traces, cities without time zones. You don't even know his middle name, Lena teased, half joking. Sofia laughed, though something inside her twisted. That night, as she waited for Ethan's message, the ticking clock echoed louder. When it finally arrived, "Wish you were here," she smiled, unaware that the truth was already beginning to whisper between the lines. Weeks later, Ethan invited her to a cabin getaway. Just us, away from everything. His voice carried that familiar calm, the tone that made doubt sound unreasonable. Sofia felt the thrill of escape, the illusion of commitment. The cabin smelled of cedar and rain when they arrived, a sanctuary built for silence. But when she asked to take a picture together, Ethan laughed it off, saying he didn't like cameras. His hand lingered on hers, reassuring, disarming. Still, something about the way he checked his phone, turning it slightly away each time, unsettled her. That night, as the fireplace flickered, Sofia lay awake beside him, realizing warmth could still feel like distance. When Ethan kissed her goodbye that Sunday, he said, "I'll call you tonight," but he didn't. The hours bled into silence. No message, no explanation. Sofia stared at her phone until dawn, her chest tight with a dread she couldn't name. When he finally replied the next morning, his excuse was simple: work emergency. The words felt mechanical, recycled. She told herself not to overthink, but the ache in her gut said otherwise. She typed and deleted her response 3 times before settling on a smiley face. Somewhere deep down, Sofia began to realize that love shouldn't have to be justified. It should speak without vanishing. Ethan Mercer's presence became a ritual Sofia Alvarez couldn't live without. His voice filled her mornings. His absence shaped her nights. He told her stories of long meetings, delayed flights, and clients who wouldn't let him breathe. Each detail painted him as the victim of his own success, a man too busy to be selfish, too devoted to lie. Yet beneath his polished explanations lived a precision that felt rehearsed. Sofia didn't notice how he always called at the same hours, how every word was measured like he was reading from memory. He spoke of the future in metaphors, never timelines, promising everything while revealing nothing. It was the kind of love that asked for faith and punished curiosity. Weeks blurred into patterns. Sophia began noticing how Ethan's affection arrived like clockwork. A text when she pulled the blinds each morning, a call just before she fell asleep. Predictable. Perfect. One evening, she overheard a woman's laughter through the phone, faint but undeniable. Ethan brushed it off, saying he was at a team dinner. His tone didn't flinch, and she forced herself to believe it. But doubt had a way of nesting in silence. That night, Sophia scrolled through their old messages, rereading every word as if searching for the hidden script beneath his charm. Every "I miss you" began to sound like something he'd practiced saying. Lena Torres visited one afternoon, bringing with her the sharpness Sophia needed, but didn't want. "You realize he's never once posted a picture of you, right?" Lena asked, voice gentle but firm. Sophia smiled it off, saying, "He's private." But the defense rang hollow in her own ears. Later that night, curiosity wrestled with fear as she searched his name online. Nothing but professional articles, conference photos, and polite smiles. No sign of the man she thought she knew. Still, she couldn't shake the pull. The dangerous comfort of denial. Love, she realized, can make even intelligent people complicit in their own illusion. Ethan began talking about commitment in vague poetry. When the timing's right, when life slows down, Sophia felt both cherished and suspended in air, trapped between promise and evasion. One evening, she mentioned wanting to meet his family. His silence stretched long enough to become an answer. When he finally spoke, it was soft but final. "My family's complicated." He kissed her forehead afterward, like an apology dressed in affection. She pretended not to notice the emotional sleight of hand. But later, as she sat alone, Sophia realized that every secret she excused became a thread he could pull to keep her quiet. By the end of the month, Sophia began living two lives. One in Ethan's presence, where everything was perfect, and another in his absence, where questions echoed unanswered. One night, she noticed his watch on her dresser. She'd never seen him take it off. Curiosity overtook caution. She lifted it, noticing a faint engraving on the back. CM, forever. Her stomach tightened. The initials weren't hers. She told herself it could mean anything. A family heirloom, a gift, a mistake. But when Ethan returned for it the next morning, his reaction was too quick, too rehearsed. "Old gift," he said, taking it back with a practiced smile. For the first time, Sophia didn't believe him. Sofia Alvarez's world began to fracture in whispers, not explosions. Ethan Mercer's voice still sounded like safety, but now each syllable carried static she couldn't ignore. He mentioned a conference in Boston, though his calendar on the table weeks before had shown Seattle. She replayed his stories in her mind, tracing inconsistencies like fingerprints on glass. Her intuition, once quiet, grew louder, a pulse behind her ribs that wouldn't let her rest. When she confronted him about the mix-up, Ethan smiled, dismissing it as fatigue. "You're overthinking," he said softly. The same tone one might use to hush a child. But that night, for the first time, Sophia didn't believe her own excuses. She knew something was wrong. The next morning, Ethan texted, "Missed your voice last night." Sophia typed, erased, and typed again before sending nothing. She opened his social media, scrolling through the same photos she'd seen countless times. Professional smiles, award ceremonies, nothing personal. Then she found a tagged image she hadn't noticed before, his arm around an unfamiliar woman, her face turned away. The post was old, the caption vague, but Sophia's heart froze. When she asked him about it later, he laughed softly. "An ex, years ago. Don't go digging for ghosts." The way he said ghosts made her skin crawl, because something in his voice didn't sound like detachment. It sounded like fear of being caught. Days passed with careful choreography. Ethan grew affectionate again, overly so, as if sensing her withdrawal. He sent flowers, voice notes, poems that didn't sound like him. One night, he appeared at her door unannounced, smiling like the man she fell for. "I missed you," he whispered, stepping closer. But Sophia noticed the faint scent of perfume that wasn't hers. When she asked, he smiled again, brushing her hair back. "You smell things that aren't there when you're anxious," he said gently. The gaslight flickered in his words. She nodded, but her heart was no longer compliant. The truth wasn't just near. It was knocking. Lena Torres grew restless, watching her friend spiral in silence. "You're not paranoid, Sophia. You're protecting yourself," she said one evening. Together they searched online again, this time deeper. They found his company's anniversary photo. Ethan standing among colleagues, smiling beside a woman who looked hauntingly familiar. Same smile, same posture. But this time the caption was unmistakable. Ethan and Claire Mercer, celebrating 5 years of success. Sophia's breath left her body. The name struck like lightning. She closed her laptop, hands trembling. Lena reached out, whispering, "You need to see the rest." But Sophia couldn't. Not yet. Not when her world had just collapsed in a single caption. That night, Sophia couldn't breathe. Every sound in her apartment echoed like accusation. The man she loved had a wife, a life she was never meant to see. She scrolled through image after image. Their wedding day, vacations, family events. The date of their anniversary overlapped the very weekend Ethan claimed to be away for work. Every lie replayed in her memory like a film she couldn't stop watching. She wanted to scream, but all that escaped her was silence. The silence of someone who had believed too deeply in a fiction. When her tears finally came, they weren't just for him. They were for the version of herself that trusted him. Sofia Alvarez didn't sleep. The truth had turned her pulse into a war drum. When the sun rose, she was still staring at Claire Mercer's smile. Radiant, unknowing, cruelly innocent. Ethan's lies looped in her head, his words echoing like broken promises in a hollow room. Every "I love you" now carried the aftertaste of betrayal. She drafted messages, confrontations, accusations, then deleted them all. She wanted to hear his lies crumble in real time. When he finally called, his tone was casual, controlled. "You sound tired," he said. Sophia whispered. "I saw her." The pause that followed wasn't shock. It was calculation. She could feel it through the line. The sound of a man rearranging his story before she could destroy it. Ethan arrived that evening without warning. No flowers this time, no excuses rehearsed to perfection. "You've misunderstood," he began, his tone steady but colder than she'd ever heard. Sophia held up her phone, the wedding photos glowing between them. "Is this a misunderstanding?" she asked. His eyes didn't flinch. "That's complicated," he said, his favorite shield. He took a slow step closer. "Claire and we're not what you think." Every word was a thread pulling her back toward the web he'd spun. But the sincerity was gone. It had curdled into manipulation. For the first time, Sophia didn't shrink. "You made me love a ghost," she whispered, voice breaking. Ethan's silence was the cruelest confession of all. He didn't apologize. He justified. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," he said softly, as if that lessened the damage. Sophia stared at him, unable to decide if she wanted to scream or laugh. "You lied to me every day," she said, voice trembling but sharp. Ethan's mask cracked for the first time. His composure faltered, eyes flickering with a shadow of fear. "You wouldn't have stayed if you knew," he said, which was the truest thing he'd ever spoken. The room felt smaller, heavier. She realized this was who he really was. Not the man who listened, but the one who calculated silence. "Get out," she said finally, her voice steady now, "and take your stories with you." After he left, The silence was unbearable. It wasn't peace. It was withdrawal. Every corner of the apartment echoed with fragments of him, his laughter, his lies, his absence. Sophia scrolled through their old messages, deleting them one by one, like dismantling a shrine. Each deletion felt like a tiny death. When she reached the first message, that coffee was fate, she paused, then pressed delete. Outside, rain began to fall, tapping softly against the window like applause for her breaking free. But freedom felt strange. It didn't taste like victory. It tasted like loss, finally named aloud. The next day, Sophia opened her email and typed to Claire Mercer. She didn't plan revenge. She sought closure. The message was calm, almost clinical. You deserve to know who he really is. I did too. Before hitting send, she hesitated, fingers hovering above the keys. Was truth an act of liberation or cruelty? When she finally clicked, the sound was quieter than expected. No thunder, no relief, just the soft click of finality. She stared at the sent folder for a long time, her chest hollow but steady. Somewhere out there, another woman was about to wake up inside the same nightmare. The days that followed blurred into quiet endurance. Ethan Mercer didn't call. Not once. But when Sofia Alvarez saw his name appear on her screen, 3 nights later, her heart betrayed her. It still skipped. The message read, "Can we talk?" She hesitated, torn between fury and curiosity. When they met at the cafe where it all began, he looked smaller, stripped of his control. "I never wanted to hurt you," he said, eyes glistening just enough to seem human. Sophia studied him like a stranger. "You didn't want to hurt me," she replied, "but you wanted to have me." His silence confirmed everything. The illusion was dead, but the ghost still stood before her, begging to be forgiven for haunting her. He leaned forward, voice low, searching her face for softness. "Claire and I are done," he said. "We live separate lives." Sophia wanted to believe it. The part of her still addicted to his charm reached for the possibility, but the scars of his precision wouldn't let her. "You said that before," she whispered. "You say things because they work." His jaw tightened, his mask reforming piece by piece. "You're angry," he said, tone rehearsed. "You'll regret this." She smiled sadly. "No, Ethan. I regret meeting you later than I should have, because now I see you clearly." His eyes flickered. Not guilt, not sorrow, but the terror of losing control. When Sophia stood to leave, Ethan's voice broke, a crack she'd never heard before. "Please, don't ruin my life," he said. The words hung heavy in the air, twisted in irony. Sophia turned slowly, meeting his desperate stare. "I'm not ruining anything," she said softly. "You did that when you built 2 lives on 1 heart." He reached out, but she stepped back, his hand freezing midair. For the first time, he looked powerless. She realized manipulation only worked when someone needed the lie. She no longer did. As she walked away, the door's bell chimed behind her, not as an ending, but as her release. That night, Ethan's name appeared again. Not as a call, but as a headline. Local architect honored for community work, pictured with wife, Claire Mercer. Sophia stared at the article in disbelief. No mention of the scandal, no hint of his deceit. The world still saw him as the man he pretended to be. She felt the familiar pull of injustice, the ache of being erased. But then she realized something liberating. His lies no longer needed her silence to survive. They were his burden now, not hers. She closed the article, turned off her phone, and whispered into the dark. "I hope she finds out." Days later, Sophia received a reply from Claire Mercer. It was brief, composed, and devastating. "Thank you for telling me. I didn't know." No anger, no denial, just grief turned into text. Sophia sat in silence, the weight of that single sentence pressing against her chest. The truth had finally found its way home, and though it shattered another heart, it freed her completely. She walked to her window, the city glowing beneath the morning sky, and whispered a promise to herself. Never again would she mistake secrecy for intimacy. Love would have to come with light, the kind that doesn't hide behind shadows. Silence became Sofia Alvarez's closest companion. After Ethan Mercer vanished from her life, the noise of absence filled every room. The absence of messages, the absence of his voice, the absence of the illusion. At first, it felt unbearable. Every corner of her apartment was haunted by memory, his laughter echoing in empty air, the ghost of a hand on her back. But in that silence, something began to shift. The stillness turned from grief to clarity, from dependency to detachment. She realized love shouldn't make her feel erased. It should amplify her voice, not silence it. For the first time in months, she opened her curtains and let the sunlight in. And it didn't hurt to see the day without him. Healing wasn't cinematic. It was slow, uneven, and cruel in its simplicity. Some days Sophia felt strong. She'd work, meet Lena, even laugh. Other days, she'd find herself staring at old photos she should deleted, her heart aching for the version of herself that believed. Lena would remind her, "You can forgive him without inviting him back." Sophia nodded, though forgiveness felt foreign, almost undeserved. Yet, one evening, as she walked through the city streets alone, she realized something subtle. She no longer flinched when she passed a cafe that smelled like him. The past was beginning to fade into something gentler. Not a wound, but a scar she could finally touch without bleeding. One afternoon, she passed the cafe where it had all begun. The same table, the same chairs, but the memory had changed its temperature. It no longer burned. It only hummed faintly, like a faded song. She sat for a moment, not out of nostalgia, but reclamation. When the barista asked for her order, she smiled and said, "A cappuccino? Just one." She didn't need to share it with anyone. As she waited, she took out her notebook and began to write, not about him, but about herself. About what it means to love without losing your name. The pen moved easily, her hand steady. For the first time, the story was hers. Again. Later that night, she found one last message from Ethan buried deep in her archives. "If you ever think of me, I hope it's fondly." The words didn't sting. They barely registered. She didn't respond, not out of anger, but indifference. The version of Sophia that would have answered no longer existed. Instead, she drafted a message to herself in her notes app. "You survived manipulation disguised as love. You are not hard to love. You were just too real for someone who needed an audience, not a partner." She saved it, locked her phone, and exhaled. The quiet was finally hers. Weeks later, Sophia began to write again. Not love stories, but truths. She poured her pain into paragraphs, turning deceit into literature. Her words were raw, trembling, alive. When her essay was published under the title, "The Man Who Taught Me Silence," it resonated far beyond her small apartment. Messages flooded in, from strangers, from survivors, from women who had also fallen for men like Ethan Mercer. Sophia realized healing was not the end of the story. It was its purpose. The past no longer owned her voice. It amplified it. And somewhere between the heartbreak and the ink, she found herself, not as the woman who was deceived, but as the one who finally spoke. Months later, Sofia Alvarez had learned to live without the echo of Ethan Mercer's name. His memory was no longer a wound, just a ghost fading in the distance. She had moved into a smaller apartment with sunlight that didn't remind her of him. Each morning began with stillness, coffee, and words that belonged only to her. The ache hadn't disappeared. It had transformed into wisdom, quiet and unwavering. When she caught her reflection one morning, she realized she finally recognized herself again. Not the woman who waited, doubted, or begged, but the one who endured and came out whole. The kind of strength that doesn't roar, but breathes softly and survives. One afternoon, Sophia walked through the park, her notebook tucked under her arm. Children played nearby, their laughter unfiltered, reminding her what honesty sounded like. She sat beneath a tree, the breeze lifting strands of her hair, and wrote her final entry. Forgiveness is not about them. It's about refusing to carry their shadow any longer. The moment she finished, a calmness settled over her chest, not joy, but release. Somewhere in another city, Ethan still lived his double life, untouched by consequences, but that no longer mattered. His story had ended inside hers, and hers was still being written. Weeks later, Sophia attended a small literary event where her essay had been featured. Strangers approached her with gratitude, with stories that mirrored her own. Each thank you felt like a brick lifted from her chest. When a woman her age whispered, "Your story gave me the courage to leave," Sophia's eyes filled, not from pain, but from recognition. She understood finally that her suffering had meaning, not because it was deserved, but because it became a bridge for others. As she read her final paragraph aloud that night, her voice didn't tremble. The words no longer belonged to her past. They belonged to everyone still trying to escape theirs. Later that night, Sophia walked home alone under a light rain. The city shimmered around her. The same streets that once reminded her of heartbreak now whispered of freedom. She passed the cafe one last time and paused briefly, not to remember, but to acknowledge. That chapter had ended, neatly folded into her past. She smiled to herself, the kind of smile that comes when pain finally stops defining you. She pulled her coat tighter and kept walking, the rain softening into mist. The city lights blurred, but the road ahead was clear. Months later, Sophia's life felt simple again. Not perfect, but real. She woke up one morning to find a message request on social media. The sender's name, Claire Mercer. The text read, "I left him. Thank you." Sophia stared at the words for a long moment before closing the app. There was nothing left to say. The past had finally ended, not in confrontation but in understanding. She stepped onto her balcony, watching the sunrise flood the skyline, the light touching everything it once couldn't reach. For the first time in years, she smiled without remembering pain. The story was over, and she was the one who survived it.